Hello, and welcome to Deep Impact, a proud member of the Duff Network where we dive deep into our bo's most nocturnal work 5 years on. Coming up next is Elliot Diebold.
And that was Ruben Morehouse.
And we are back to talk about Sine DA 14.5. You can really feel the tension ratcheting up in this chapter, huh? So Blake and Evan are flying around and, chilling, having a good fun flying time until they basically inadvertently run across the evil vultures from the Jungle Book.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah, it's a reference. God.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I haven't seen it. I guess I wouldn't call it that inadvertently. Evan tells Blake that to get ready.
That's true. Evan knows what's up.
Yeah, he just seems to really overestimate Blake's capability to handle it, is how Blake phrases it later.
Yes.
But yeah, obviously a lot of this chapter I feel like is just setting up how Mara's this whole forest is.
Yeah.
And I love the way that we even establish right at the start here, the skies aren't safe because you're going to get a bunch of zombified birds coming at you. And that also very quickly establishes the whole idea that nature has been twisted to serve her purposes in this area, I would sort of say, with these birds.
Yeah, it reminds me of, and it kind of feels like it's paralleling a bit, Johannes's domain, which is a bit more, modern version of this, where it's explicitly his, but it's very clear that Mara has her influence across this entire forest.
I would actually say, for me, I'd compare it more to Conquest's domain or even Poe's area when he was affected.
Yeah.
Like, those obviously aren't very charitable comparisons. Like, so sorry, Mara, but
to the hag.
Yeah. But the idea of she's just done the human equivalent of stay in this area for so long that you've kind of leaked your essence onto it. And
yeah,
I mean, for her, that's not as simply defined as like a conquering energy or a like inverting the natural order energy, but I think it's the same idea where it's not like a domain where she just kind of magically shortcutted to own it, but she's just leaked her own essence into it so much that it effectively conspires to work with her.
Yeah, you're right. I like the idea of thinking about it as analogous to a conquest domain, right? But the interesting thing is, it seems that it's not magical essence that is leaking out. It's just her time and patience, getting to know it and working it, mechanically working it to her advantage.
I mean, I think it, a little of column A, a little of column B. It's packed as both. But yeah, you're right. There's just as much that we'll get into that establishes that she doesn't always resort to magical means to set this place up to serve her will.
Yeah. There's this fun little beat at the start of this chapter where Blake kind of recognizes these birds really quickly and distinguishes them by their calls, which Evan rightfully calls out makes him a bird nerd.
Yeah,
which is very true. I love the idea as well that Granny Rose was like, "Now, what do we do with this bird nerd knowledge? I guess we'll give it to Blake."
I mean, I guess I don't want to assume that the Granny Rose pieced together every single detail of Ross that like she may have just given Barbatorum some sort of general policies to go with.
Sure.
I mean, like the other idea that this sort of spurred in me was Blake is so obsessed with like freedom and breaking the rules, fighting the system kind of thing. Like he doesn't want to be tied down. And I think that like a good practitioner kind of does, because then you get a domain and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So I like the idea that, Blake's obsession with freedom is something that she wouldn't have wanted Rose to have. And maybe that's tied too tightly with the idea of the bird love. Like,
yeah,
because birds as a symbol represent that freedom of movement, and it's especially to Blake. And so, like, I wonder if those two things kind of came part and parcel just because of them being so closely aligned symbolically.
Yeah, that makes sense. As a kind of representation, a kind of symbolic impact representation of the fact that Blake, loves freedom, and this is exemplified a lot by birds through his tattoos and Evan. So why not also have bird knowledge? It makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, demons can't create, so presumably, unless the spirits gave it to him, the bird knowledge was already there. But I like Barbatorum, if he didn't have explicit instructions to that detail, he may have just associated it with freedom and stuff, and that might not be in, Rose's design spec.
Yeah.
I also want to touch on something Evan seeds here, with this idea that he's been talking to all those sort of lesser spirits and stuff around town. Like we saw him converse with the really mean cats that were ancient Greeks a couple of arcs ago now, or more than a couple of arcs ago. And I don't quite know why I've latched onto this idea so much, but it just seems like a really good thing that Evan's been running around and kind of making friends, I guess.
Yeah, it also indicates that he's just had time to or maybe not even time, but he's just kind of had his own little adventures, right? The scenes where he was off scouting ahead, for example, he might have run across one of these Greek cats and just had a bit of a chat with them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, definitely a bit of distance from Blake right now wouldn't be the most unhealthy thing for Evan. And yeah, I don't know. Like, it's just in a world, and particularly in a time in Jacob's Bell where connections are so important, it just feels like a good thing that Evan's been running around kind of doing that. I don't know. Maybe this won't go anywhere. Like, I've just sort of latched onto what's like 2 sentences. But it just felt like a really good thing that Evan is doing this. And even if it goes nowhere, it's still nice to know that he was doing it.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, it's a smart play, right? It's good work by Evan.
Hopefully, yeah.
So Blake and Evan eventually decide to run away from these turkey vultures and other miscellaneous birds that are pursuing them, but they're obviously a bit outmatched in the flying department. And these birds eventually catch up and start swarming Blake, which forces him and Evan to basically just suicide dive into the trees and bushes below to escape.
Yeah, you said like the turkey vultures and stuff, but it's also some of them are crows, and you know, maybe Corvidae just got some bits in before finding Tiff.
Is it foreshadowing, or Corvidae's actually just taking the opportunity to be a dick?
Oh, I'm undercover, I have to do this, it doesn't really hurt you. Like, I can totally see him making that excuse.
Yeah, no, it's great.
I mean, yeah, but like this whole thing with the birds kind of, you know, swarming him, basically. Blake compares it to poos, and like I agree. I don't know, there's something about the swarming that is very horrifying. Like all the little things attacking you all over. Like, you know, Evan keeps talking about how, oh, it's okay, they can't snatch you up like they could him, but it's like for Blake it's worse because with that number you can't defend yourself on all sides.
Yeah, and we see this in action because these birds do the exact same thing that Blake did to the dragon, which is they claw at his sweatshirt wings to make him not be able to fly anymore. Which is obviously, it's a great strategy. It's the exact strategy that Blake used on the dragon, and he kind of realizes immediately that the birds are going to do this to him, and he can't really stop them.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. We talked about this last episode, and you sort of mentioned maybe it was setting up that Blake had this vulnerability, and that seems like exactly what it did. Like he was the little bird attacking the big dragon's wings last chapter, and now he's basically having that done to him about 15 minutes later, probably not even that long. It's a great little inversion on the fight from last chapter.
Yes. And so Blake and Evan go down to the forest floor, and this forest is really fun. It kind of reminds me stylistically of the swamp from Avatar: The Last Airbender, which is that the trees like feel like they are watching Blake in a very real way. Walls seem to pop up in front of Blake without him realizing. Like it's a very classic spooky setting.
Yeah, but it's different in that way that, like, it's like in Avatar, it kind of felt like the swamp was a hive mind, or individual trees were alive. In this one, it's just, they're just trees. And it's just like, it almost feels more to me like reality distorts to make things not work for you. I'm not under the impression that, you know, the forest was able to grow in such a way that it's like, 50 years from now, this is going to get in Blake's way. Or that, you know, it's just in general trying to get in the way from that angle. It almost just feels like it's sort of, you know, you blink or whatever and things have just rearranged. Reality has just sort of moved itself, and that's sort of how the spirits work, I think.
Yeah.
And now suddenly it's just inconvenient for you because you're not Mara.
I kind of feel like it is Mara, having tended this forest over hundreds or thousands of years, kind of has made it hostile. Like, oh, okay, well, I imagine if there's birds flying through here, I'll make these trees so that they kind of grow into a wall of trees if they come from this direction. And then in, 30 years, that is realized. And that's just kind of the scale of the the fuckery that she does.
Yeah, maybe. I was sort of working off the assumption that it's like if you had been there, or if Mara is there 1 week, the trees would just sort of be normal, and then you come back a week later as Blake, and it's just sort of like now the trees are just in the way, and they didn't move, but also they did. Like it's that mind bendy shit. Like the library in the house is sort of kind of what I'm comparing it to.
Yeah. Okay.
It's like if a tree gets in the way in the woods and no one's there to see it, did it move?
Yeah, I suppose. Yeah, that makes sense. Look, we don't get a confirmation either way, so
No.
it could be anything along this kind of spectrum.
Yeah.
So yeah, Blake crashes himself into enough trees, basically, that the birds give up, and then they start to move towards the others, or the others, depending on which ones we're talking about. And as he moves towards them, he and Evan come across a clearing, which they can kind of feel is a trap. And Evan seems very certain of it, where Blake just has this kind of gut sense, but they both feel it enough to be quite wary.
Fuck, Evan's useful.
I know, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I enjoyed this little puzzle because it's so instantly set up as like, okay, this is a trap. I never questioned that this was a trap, and so it's fun kind of watching them try to figure out what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weird trap as well, right? I guess we'll get to that in a second. Blake and Evan have this chat where Evan thinks Blake is good at fighting, and Blake kind of uses the vultures to demonstrate that he's not really good at fighting. Like, he can't learn how to do a roundhouse kick. All he can really do is continue to fight. That's his real skill, is he doesn't stop fighting.
Yeah, I like how he phrases it as scrapping, because that's definitely how Blake always feels. He's almost, well, maybe there were some bits in Arc 13, but it doesn't ever really feel like he's, leading the charge and using his mad sword skills. He's always just like panickingly stabbing shit with the hyena, like it comes from a place of, oh god, I need to survive another 30 seconds, not like this blow will
I'll use my
defeat my
secret
foe.
technique. Yeah. I love the word scrapping as well, because in so many ways Blake is scrap, like he is literal scrap. So the word scrapping has some really fun meanings there.
Yeah, I mean, he even talks about how he can't roundhouse kick, and I was thinking, like, I could actually see it in this world. Blake learning martial arts or learning aerial combat could almost hurt him in a way, because his thing that he is very well established with the spirits inside and around him is that he scraps.
Yeah.
And if he, learnt to fight, he might sort of weaken that thing that gives him strength.
Yeah, if he actually had definitive wins, that would probably be problematic, because this whole thing is, I keep going until I've worn down my opponent, and then I cut their head off with the hyena.
I mean, and he talks some more about this at the end of the chapter. Like, I think this is setting us up for the train of thought he has at the end of the chapter, so we'll touch on it when we get there, I guess.
Yeah. So yeah, back to this trapped clearing. They're kind of trying to suss it out, and eventually Evan is quite instrumental in realizing that there's less snow in certain parts than others. Blake recognizes tracks that indicate Mara has been here, and so Blake kind of triggers this trap, which ends up triggering a bunch of falling trees, which is a weird trap, but yeah, it's triggered safely, so good job, Blake.
Yeah, I mean, it seems pretty thorough. Like, it even has a contingency log to try and catch some of the people who can dodge the main 3 trees that fall down. Yeah,
and now I want to talk about this trap, because it's really weird, right? Like, it gives me this, like, fucking Ewok vibe, right? Where Mara... I don't know if Mara actually sees herself like this, but she is the outsider, and she's kind of like the resistance against the modernization of magic. And she just is living in her forest, setting up weird tree traps that actually don't use magic. They're just kind of mechanical. It's really weird, and it's a really different vibe, because Mara is just doing... Like, you imagine that she might have set one of those traps where you dig a hole and put leaves over it and wait until someone falls in.
Yeah, it does seem like the very long-term equivalent. I mean, something that Blake points out as the trees are falling is that they look like trees that are probably 100 years old. Yeah. Which, again, really reinforces this idea of how long-term and committed Mara is to this shit. Like, she's got traps set up with 100-year-old trees, which sort of implies to me that she's... she's expecting to be here in 100 years to do more of this, I guess. Yeah, like it's it is so mundane, but at the same time, I think is something she can do so easily because this place is hers. Like I don't know, this reinforces the ownership, well, not quite ownership, the presence she has in these woods.
Yeah.
In a way that complements like all the more magical stuff, like the way the trees just grow to get in your way, or the skinned vultures and stuff. It's she's so much a part of this that she's also just set up like Boy Scout plus traps.
Yeah, I kind of want to say that she's like nurtured this forest, but that's too wholesome of a word. She's like evil nurtured it. I don't know what the word is.
She's shaped it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's really interesting. It's an interesting vibe. Anyway, so with this trap safely diffused, Blake and Evan rejoin the others, and Roxanne is starting to freak out a bit at justifiably, because, this is her first night in this world, and it's not a great one. And so she's freaking out, and Peter delivers one of his patented monologues to her, basically imploring for her to not be such a shit. And it works, of course, because Peter's awesome.
I don't know if imploring is the right word for what he does, because it's like he doesn't really ever. He just goes off on a tangent about how shit every Thorburn is, but she's kind of the most efficient shit.
Well, they're all shit, but she's the most harmful shit one.
Yeah, and I mean, like. I got to agree with him here. This is one of those ones where I was like, yeah, I get how this is comforting. Like him basically saying, hey, you're the most violent, and right now, like, good for you.
Yeah. Well, but also, what he basically says is being a Thorburn comes with a lot of power, and you need to learn to direct that power of being shit at the right targets.
Yeah, you're right. He doesn't really tell her to stop. He just tells her to like change direction. He's like, hey, keep being like shit. Just like don't
not towards
your allies, be shit to the enemies, and I guess that's something Roxanne can get behind.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so good. Like he perfectly gets through to Roxanne, and every time this happens, we see how effective Peter is at not manipulating, but like getting through to people, I guess. And maybe it is manipulating, but it's manipulating in a kind of transparent way.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. I guess you gotta. Like the connotation of the word manipulate to me like isn't as good for something that maybe is genuinely mutually beneficial. Like I think it is better for him and Roxanne and everyone else in this group that she point her violent tendencies outwards. So like manipulate feels like the wrong word to me because it's like that kind of has a sense of tricking you into doing something, whereas that's not what he's doing. He's just kind of helping her see that it's not this helps everyone. I don't know. But you're right. I enjoy Peter as the fuckwit whisperer. Like we saw him do it a lot before, and it's good to see him doing it again.
Yeah, totally. I think it's my favorite bits of Pact is Peter being like perfect at dealing with the situation.
I mean, what's funny is he sells himself as this, and he's been sold to us as this person who can read people. Like, apparently what he's good at is sort of figuring people out and using that. But what we've mostly seen it pointed towards so far is Thorburns and some other, like, shit people. And maybe that's just the crowd that we've gotten to see him interact with.
Who else would he interact with?
But it does kind of feel like he's almost set up as someone who is great at dealing with the worst of the worst. He's someone
he's just kind of learned how to...
Yeah, well, yeah, like, obviously, Thorburns, he had lots of prime pickings, but he seems like someone who's like, when you got, like, someone who's potentially very problematic, like Roxanne, you give them the Peter, and he can help, like, realize what's going to get them helping themselves and everyone else.
Yeah. A+ work, Peter. I think it's worth pointing out off the back of this conversation as well that...
Oh, sorry, I also do want to state, I think part of the reason Peter is so good at understanding fuckwits is because he also is one. Right? That does just need to be said.
he definitely is. No, but I kind of want to point out again, Rose definitely got the shittier team here. Like, Roxanne was the weak link on this team, and she's already, like, picked up an arsenal of weapons to use.
Yeah, that reveal that she's just fucking, like, equipped with most of Eva's stuff is very cool.
Yeah.
I really want to see her apprentice with Eva. I know I've been saying that forever, but it just needs to happen.
Yeah, no, it would be good. One more thing on this Peter and Roxanne conversation, which is Blake, it ends with Peter saying "come on" to Roxanne, which Blake thinks sounds like a disappointed parent in the tone that he says it, and then Blake thinks on it for a second and realizes, oh wait, that actually might be what helps get through to Roxanne. And it kind of, again, just emphasizes, like, Blake doesn't even realize how effective Peter is being until he kind of reflects on it. It gives me this vibe that also Peter is kind of, in some ways, accidentally playing into exactly the right words that he needs to. He's just such a natural at getting people on side, getting shit people to direct their shitness in the right way.
Yeah, I describe him as like a natural talent where I agree he's maybe putting some of these effects on subconsciously. Like he's not actively thinking, oh, and I need to say these next words in this sort of tone to be more effective. It's just like that's sort of his instincts. And Blake's not going to criticize anyone for following their instincts, I hope.
Yeah, I would hope not. So the party is back together now, and they realize that the falling tree trap wasn't the only trap. There's also what is referred to as a guardian, a spirit guarding this forest, which approaches them and almost immediately starts killing Blake.
Yeah, well, good thing we know it's a guardian, thanks to Jez's crew.
Very helpful.
Yeah, really glad we keep bringing them around. They seem very helpful.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that. They are helpful in one specific way, which I'll talk about later. But there's this bit where Green Eyes is kind of trying to identify this thing, and she calls it as feeling like the blackfish, which is such a great way to set up the vibe that we're meant to have, because that immediately means, okay, it's enigmatic, it's bad, whatever it is, it's going to target the worst parts of us, and we don't understand it. And that's all we really need to know for this bad spirit, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It sets it up as such not just a threat physically, but something that feels like it's attacking them emotionally. Because the fact that it feels like the blackfish, but less personal, just sends up this sense of this thing just emanates bad vibes.
Yeah, definitely. And so this thing is strangling Blake, and nobody is able to do anything. Like, every attack they try is completely ineffectual. It just faces through it. Until suddenly, our hero, our champion, Corvidae, comes in and immediately kills this spirit. And it's so strange. Like, Corvidae just busts in and immediately murders this thing, which was completely unaffected by any previous attacks. And it just makes me so uneasy how easily Corvidae beat this.
Yeah, I mean, he's both the hero Blake needs and the hero Blake deserves.
Harsh.
You're right. He sort of literally swoops in and saves the day so easily to the point where you're kind of like, was this
something's going on here? Yeah, it feels like a setup to me.
And even then, he just kind of like the astral thing set up as sort of so untouchable, and Corvidae can just touch it and everyone's like, oh, glad he's on our side. And it's playing off this dramatic irony because we know even more than Blake how attached Corvidae and Mara are.
Yes.
So coming in and setting up Corvidae as powerful is great because it both sets up for us the dread that we realize they're going to be like, oh, good thing we've got Corvidae. And also we're like, oh shit, Corvidae's really powerful, isn't he? Like, this is even worse that he's essentially against them here.
Yeah. And I like the way Blake deals with Corvidae because he's so clearly not jazzed that he's here. Corvidae comes in and says, I live to serve, and Blake turns his back on him and says, yeah, that sounds like it sucks, and just keeps walking. Like, it's fucking stone cold. I love it.
I love this little exchange on so many levels, because it's just, like, you can just picture how this is affecting both of them, particularly Corvidae. I mean, especially because, like, there are ways these two are actually quite similar. I mean, obviously, bird symbolism aside, they kind of share views on the current world order of Pact. There's actually like kind of a lot I think these two could agree on, but neither one's really looking to sympathize with the other.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder what the avenue is to get them to a place of being genuinely allies, or if that's even possible for Corvidae. Like, can he even have a relationship that he doesn't corrupt? I don't know.
Well, I mean, he seems to be going all right with Mara.
Well, true. Well, we'll see, I guess.
Well, he had the hair ring on his finger, so I'm still assuming they're married, or whatever the equivalent is.
Yeah. So the group continue on with Corvidae, bringing up the rear, which is a fact that makes Blake very nervous. And they're kind of talking about Mara, when suddenly she's just there, Corvidae in the back, Mara in the front, and Mara turns to them, and it's clear that things are about to get very hostile.
Yeah, I mean, and Blake has kept it to himself that he knows Corvidae and Mara have something because he saw that abyss vision of
Yes.
Corvidae smiling at Mara. And in fact, he actually goes on this sort of thought tangent thinking, everything the abyss has shown me was for a reason. Did it show me that for a reason? Which feels kind of like bonkers if it's right, because that's an incredible amount of foresight by the abyss. If it was for this specific moment, maybe the abyss might have just been playing the numbers and maybe knew that this might come up, or I don't know. I have to believe that. I can't believe that the abyss is that clever and sees sees that far ahead. That it's that it could have picked this that long ago.
Yeah, and the other thing to keep in mind is even if it is, yes, sure, it's for a reason, but that doesn't mean it's for a reason that is helpful to you, Blake.
Yeah, true. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. Blake decides not to share the information that he knows that Corvidae is not on their side for now. He's keeping that to himself. We'll see how that works out. But yeah, I could see Corvidae and the Abyss not getting along. To be honest, didn't Corvidae kind of go into the Abyss and steal his name or whatever? I think I'd have to go back and read his little interlude section, but there's a bit where he talks about dipping into the Abyss, and I wonder if maybe he took more than he gave, and the Abyss harbors a little grudge.
Maybe. I don't recall.
But yeah, anyway, after Blake has all these thoughts about Corvidae and whether the Abyss has been manipulating this relationship for so long, he then thinks back to some of the discussions that have already happened this chapter, and he thinks, my pattern, my last-ditch measure, fight, scrap, push forward, my last-ditch measure, every step of the way, had been to sacrifice a little bit of myself on the course to winning the fight. I wouldn't make it to the end of this if I kept it up. And so, Blake wins the Better Late Than Never award right here.
Yeah, but I got these cool wings.
But I think this is really interesting, moving forward into this confrontation, I assume, with Mara next chapter. Blake has sort of identified his pattern throughout this chapter, which was I scrap and I lose a bit of myself. And now he's sort of saying maybe he does need to break that pattern.
Yeah.
And we're set up in this battlefield where I think it's very likely he will lose any confrontation. They sort of say that at the end of the chapter. If we turn this into a confrontation, we're done skis. So I think we're setting up this really interesting thing where I think Blake is going to have to try and outwit Mara and Corvidae, perhaps, using words or something, rather than the more traditional route of
give up some flesh.
Yeah, exactly. Just sacrifice a bit of yourself to win the fight. I think I get the impression that's what's being set up here is a fight of a different sort. And that's going to be really fun because Mara's an enemy of a very different sort too.
Yes. Yeah, no, you're right. It's a good thing to keep our finger on because obviously Blake refused to sacrifice for his wings as well. So it's clear that this is a trend that is being set up of Blake saying, no, I'm not going to be this sacrificial lamb anymore.
Yeah. Is it the sacrificial lamb when you're the one doing most of the sacrificing?
Yeah, true. I don't know. The self-sacrificial lamb.
Yeah.
So yeah, this is a chapter that's all about building up the tension for this showdown with Mara, and I'm so here for it. I love the way that when you fight a new practitioner, and Mara isn't a practitioner, but she's, analogous to one, it's so much about, there's so much that goes into setting up the ambience for their style, right? The Duchamps, we had this. When we were in Johannes' domain, we had this. For Conquest, we had this so much. And it's you get these early chapters where you're stepping through their territory and starting to understand them through their surroundings. And then you get the showdown. And it's such a great way to set up the type of thing that they are. It's always so good.
Yeah, I completely agree. This chapter did two things in my eyes. It established this pattern with Blake and the fact that he maybe is looking to break from it a little bit. And it really heavily established that Mara is just an intrinsic part of this forest. I wonder if the line between Mara and this forest is even that distinct. It's going to be very fun to sort of see how this conflict arises. As you said, it's established her as just, such a kind of formidable foe because they're on her turf.
Yeah. There's one other thing that this chapter does, which I like, which is it's starting to set up this thing of Blake being really good at reacting to the danger sense of the others in his group. Like the Satyr and the Maenads specifically, Blake will basically react to their reactions, and it leads to him reacting to things so much faster. It's just a cool little recurring beat that I've noticed. I don't know what it is going to lead to, but it's just very cool.
Yeah, there was a bit in the Dragon chapter I don't think we actually pulled out where Blake notices like Jez's crew and Green Eye react to something the dragon is, or they just react, and he doesn't even look to confirm what it is. He just instantly dives and brings like Peter and Roxanne with him or something. It gives you this sense of how he's sort of starting to get good at utilizing the strengths of the people around him. Definitely. I don't know. I agree. It is starting to feel like he's taking advantage of some of these abilities that the others around him have.
Yeah, it's good that he's kind of always been defined by being a sort of Pokemon trainer of sorts. And it's cool to see that being maintained even as he changes so much.
Yeah.
That's the end of Sine DA 14.5, but not the end of our episode yet, because it's time to take a look at what people were saying when this chapter first came out 5 years ago, with a comment dive. So let's dive into some comments. Elliot, do you want to talk about one?
Yeah, sure. So I've picked out one. It started off with a comment by Glassware, who just pointed out something that we've obviously talked about, which is how fucked up it is that Evan is so okay with Blake's murdering. A bit in this chapter that we kind of skipped over is a bit where Peter says Roxanne is a very good monster, and Evan is like, Blake's a really good monster. He murdered a bunch of people really well. Glassware sort of points out that, hey, but this is not okay.
Yeah, is that a good thing to be proud of?
Yeah, and some of the responses to this kind of got my mind turning. Like Nick 012,000 points out, Evan plays video games, and maybe he associates Blake as, the hero in the video game who kills all the monsters and that sort of thing. Like Evan has obviously talked a lot of times about the video games he plays having, supernatural bad guys that need to be killed. And this sort of thing got me thinking, like, we know Evan has sort of been deteriorating for a long time, without his familiar connection to Blake. And I just wonder if maybe he is losing his grip on reality a bit. I don't know. Like if his acceptance of all this stuff is a symptom of him starting to fall apart, basically.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, could be. I mean, or I don't know if it has to be him falling apart, and it could just be he is very young and he kind of isn't mature enough to process the world in certain ways, but
yeah,
I do like the idea that it could be an extension of that into him literally losing his grip on reality.
Yeah, so that was something a bunch of other commenters started talking about, was this idea that like children kind of look to the other people to start developing their moral compass in a lot of ways, and maybe Blake is not the person that Evan should be looking up to.
How dare you say that? Yeah.
I mean, yeah, that could be sort of another angle in this whole thing. Like Evan's whole thing kind of is that he doesn't like to let go of stuff, and it's like his insistence on holding on to Blake as someone who is good and that he should look up to is maybe like his big failure, or something that's going to come back to bite both of them in the ass. Because in a lot of ways, Blake has kind of been looking to Evan as someone like, Blake's been turning to Evan as like this, what is good and what is right, and maybe you shouldn't do that to a 7-year-old who is dead.
No, not just dead. He's a bird and a kid.
Yeah. So what have you brought?
I put out a comment by a user called Sherm, and this is just a fact for all the bird nerds out there. There are a few comments talking about like, oh, it's so cool that Mara's enhanced these turkey vultures because they're able to fly without really flapping their wings. And Sherm comes in with the bird facts, which is actually turkey vultures mostly use thermals to gain altitude, which is perfect because it's just a nice bird fact that you can learn through this story. But also, it's such a perfect mirror, again, of Blake fighting against the dragon and needing to use the heat from the fires to fly. Like, what a great little link between them again.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, like, obviously there was probably some magic there because there's no thermal winds in this forest right now. I can
Whoa,
pretty
whoa,
much
whoa.
guarantee you.
How dare you?
But no, you're right. Like, considering how much we already talked about that attack on Blake mirroring what he did to the dragon last chapter, I think that's probably a very subtle other way that this is meant to mirror it.
Yeah. Which begs the question, of course, who will be the giant that Blake perches in the hand of?
I mean, Evan, I think.
Oh yeah. Evan holds out his arm and Blake just
mean,
lands on it nicely.
It's a more metaphorical perching that
okay.
But yeah.
Okay, fair enough. Anyway, that's the end of our episode discussing Sine DA 14.5, but it's not the end of our podcast yet. If you are interested in the end of our podcast, then you should check out the announcement video we did for All Packed Up and leave us your ideas on what you'd like to see for it.
Mm-hmm. Also, remember, we're actually running a Q&A right now, so answers to that, like, don't need to be until the 21st of December or so.
Mm-hmm.
So, you got plenty of time, but if you have any questions for us, I guess, that are Pact related, probably, we'll answer them if you send them in.
Yep, we know everything about Pact, even though we haven't even finished it yet. Yes, you can leave those in the discussion thread, which will be linked down below, or email them to us at mediamdpodcast@gmail.com, or tweet them at us. We have a Twitter. It's at mediamdpodcast. You can do that too.
Mm-hmm. And, there are other shows on the Tooth Network you should check out. There's Media MD, obviously. But there's also some other great ones. One that's doing very well right now is Do the Right Thing, which of course is a group creative writing. I don't know what to call it. Group creative writing
podcast.
Yeah, okay, that'll do. I was looking for another word between podcast and writing, but yeah. Do the Right Thing's actually running a contest now, which is really cool. So they've got a sort of contest where you edit anything that you write between a couple of weeks ago and January and just sort of touch it up, keep it under the Do the Right Thing word limit. And there's like some cash prizes and everything. So it's another incentive to kind of get involved in what's a really fun exercise anyway.
Yeah. The reason we're able to offer cash prizes for stuff and do all kinds of cool contests is because of our patrons who support us both with love and money. If you'd like to support us with love and money, head on over to patreon.com/doofmedia to become a patron and get access to a bunch of cool perks.
Yes, and of course it's a bit of a given that you shower Wildbow with love if you've made it this far into our podcast and Pact, but you should also shower him with some money if you can over at patreon.com/Wildbow.
Yes, and that's our episode. So we'll be back soon for Sine DA 14.6 on Monday, the 16th of December. So we'll see you then.
See ya.